Today on Cook's Country, Bridget reveals how to make the ultimate Swiss steak. Then, Jack challenges Chris to a tasting of tomato paste. Next, Julia revives a classic recipe for baked potato fans. And finally, Adam reveals his top picks for immersion blenders. That's all right here on Cook's Country. Cook's Country from America's Test Kitchen is brought to you by DCS by Fisher & Paykel. America's cooks rely on innovation and culinary precision. DCS by Fisher & Paykel, offering premium indoor and outdoor kitchen appliances. Chef's Catalog, offering kitchen products for home chefs and cooking enthusiasts. Online at chefscatalog.com. And by Valley Fig Growers, offering a fruitful array of California figs.
Now, who doesn't love Swiss steak? Well, I don't love Swiss steak, and neither do you, and that's because it's the bane of bad cafeteria food. It's a really low-quality piece of meat that's pot-roasted for a long time until it's fall apart. In fact, it was served to soldiers in both world wars in mess halls. Navy cooks actually made it out of goat meat. Sometimes you could even get it out of a vending machine. So it wasn't actually our favorite dish here in America. Well, it turns out that Swiss steak does not come from Switzerland. It comes from a technique called Swissing. They take fabric and they'd soften it either by running it through rollers or pounding it until it was soft. So the same thing goes for a tough cut of meat. It was Swissed. It was made tender. Now, not to confuse this with a cube steak, that's a very different method. It was a machine invented by a guy called Joseph Spang of Quincy, Massachusetts in the 1920s. The meat was pounded, it was flattened, it was actually perforated, there was much more surface area, so the steak was tender and also cooked quickly. But a Swiss steak is a 1-inch thick steak, usually from the round. So World War II made Swiss steak very popular, and that's because there's a shortage of grain-fed grade A beef. All the good stuff was being sent overseas to the military or to restaurants, so many housewives really had a lower quality beef, and here's a description of it from that time. On the shelves of butchers throughout the country, a good type of beef, untried by most city housewives, will be plentiful this fall. This is utility or grade C beef. So this is grass-fed, tough, and had sort of an off flavor, so they actually pot roasted or braised it for a long time. Now, we remember Swiss steak as not being a great recipe, but the idea is great. Economical piece of beef, turn it tender, and add a lot of flavor to it. So let's go into the test kitchen with Bridget and figure out the secrets to great Swiss steak. As I said, back in World War II, Swiss steak was made with grade C beef. That was grass-fed, and it was gnarly stuff.
Not good.
That's why they cooked it for hours and added a lot of flavor to it. And it was almost always made from the round. The round's very inexpensive, about $4 a pound. Doesn't have a lot of flavor, doesn't have a lot of fat, but there's a lot of it and not many bones, so butchers like to sell the round. So
right.
I asked Bridget. Are you Bridget?
I am.
Oh, good.
Today.
How fortunate. To test a lot of cuts to see if we actually wanted to stick with a round like they did 60 years ago or try another cut of beef.
Well, if you look at recipes today for Swiss steak or go to the supermarket and check out the cheap cuts, it's one of the most popular cheap steaks you can buy. And this is a round steak. Now, the problem with round steaks is they don't taste very good. They're a little bit livery, and they're quite tough. And if you manage to get them tender, they still have this webby quality about them. They can be kind of chalky and dry. Not good. So what manufacturers have done is they've taken round steaks and they've put them through this machine and it cubes them, kind of breaks it up into these fibrous pieces. And it tenderizes it to a fault. I mean, that looks like an old shoe from, 1935, so not a good option.
Do you still have shoes from 1935?
I do not.
So what's the one in the middle?
This is a blade steak, and it comes from the shoulder part of the cow. And we love the flavor. It's a really flavorful cut of meat, great intramuscular fat. But there is one problem with it, and you see this line of connective tissue. It's really, really hard, and it never dissolves away. So with a dish like Swiss steak, where you're basically smothering the steaks in a thick gravy, you might be cutting into that and eating it. It's not a pleasant experience. So we wanted to find a way to make our own blade steaks, and I'm going to show you what we did. This is a 4-pound blade roast, and you can see if I hold it here on its side, there's that connective tissue that we want to get rid of. Now, butchers would take this cut of meat, and to make these steaks, they would simply slice it in pretty thin slices. Now I'm going to show you how we're able to get 8 steaks out of here without that connective tissue. All right, so I'm going to cut this right in half, cut each half in half. essentially making 4 mini roasts. So in order to make steaks out of this, you see if I flip this over on its side, there's still that connective tissue. All I'm going to do is take my knife and run it down either side. And now I've got a blade steak without the connective tissue. So just right on the other side.
You can just tell compared to the round, this has so much more fat in it, it's going to end up being more tender.
Much tastier. All right, so while I'm finishing this last steak, if you wouldn't mind, I've got a little bit of oil over here. It's a tablespoon of oil. If you could put it in the Dutch oven, we want to get that oil smoking because in just a minute here, we're going to start browning the beef. So I want to pat them dry with paper towels, get rid of any excess moisture from the surface, because that moisture on the surface is really going to inhibit any kind of browning. All right, and I'm going to season them very well, both sides, with salt and pepper. Pepper, again, both sides. I'm going to brown these in 2 batches, and we don't want to overcrowd the pan because then we would steam the meat rather than get a good brown fond. So, in it goes, and we know it's the right temperature because we can get that good sizzle. So just 4 at a time. We're going to brown these on both sides, and that's going to take about 3 minutes. I'm going to flip it over, 3 minutes on the second side, and then we get to do the same thing to the second batch. All right, so you can see the beef is no longer in here.
Where'd it go?
Remember, I cooked it in 2 batches.
Yep.
There it is on the plate. And in the meantime, I cooked 1 onion and cooked it until it softened, and that only took about 5 minutes. And you can see all that beautiful brown fond in the bottom of the pan. Time to add the rest of the aromatics here. What I have is 3 garlic cloves minced and a half a teaspoon of dried thyme. And dried thyme you can use here. In fact, we prefer it in a case like this where it's going to be a long cooking technique. Now this is 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. It's going to add some texture to the sauce, but also give a rich kind of sweet tomatoey flavor. And to help thicken, I've got a tablespoon of all-purpose flour. Now I just want to cook all this together, kind of get rid of any of that raw flour flavor. What I have here is 1 14.5-ounce can of diced tomatoes with the juice. To the diced tomatoes, I'm going to add 1.5 cups of chicken broth. And this is going to be our braising liquid. You can see it starting to bubble around the edges there. So I'm going to go ahead and add the steaks back to the pan. Nestle them right into that liquid.
So when you cook and you're alone, do you make those noises
I do.
too? Or is just when you're doing it in Cook's Country?
I do until the cops show at the front door. I'm also going to pour all these beautiful juices right in there. That's a ton of flavor. So now that this is up to a boil, I'm going to put the lid on. We're going to put this right into a 300-degree oven until the steaks are really pretty tender, and that's going to take about 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Now we should talk, as we have quite a lot of time right now, wouldn't you say? Talk about collagen, because those are the interconnective tissues in a piece of meat, especially in a piece of meat like the chuck, which has more fat. What happens is over time that breaks down and it really turns into gelatin. It'll take liquid, absorb it, and hold it in the meat. And that's why, let's say, shanks or a piece of chuck or something like that, long cooks, low and slow, at the end you get a very tender, very juicy piece of meat because that collagen, which is tough when it's raw, breaks down, turns to gelatin, and holds in the water.
All right, Chris, but we still have 2 hours to wait until that steak is done. All right, so it's been 2 hours. I just pulled this out of the oven, and voila. I'm going to take a pair of tongs here and test it. You can see that it barely holds together. Look how tender that is. So, remove the steak.
Shall I hold this for you?
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, this looks great. Just nestle them together here. If you would be so kind as to cover that with foil, we're going to let that rest for a few minutes. So I just want to go in here and skim off any residual fat on the top. And that looks pretty darn good. So now I can finish my sauce. I've got a tablespoon of sun-dried tomatoes. That's going to add a nice sweet boost of tomato flavor right at the end. So we've got the tomatoes that have cooked in there for a long time. We've got this nice sweet boost at the end. I've got a tablespoon of fresh minced parsley and a little bit of salt and pepper. Let me just give this a quick taste here.
Isn't that, do I get to do something here?
Chris, why don't you give that a quick taste? Tell
There
me what
you go,
think.
see? I'm doing all this work and now I get to taste it.
Spot on.
You're a winner, again. Yeah, it's so boring around here. It always comes out great. That really is delicious.
All right, so we're ready to eat. I'm going to start saucing the steaks. That is what I call a tomato gravy. Beautiful. One steak or two, Chris?
Two.
Good boy. Putting some of that sauce onto your plate as well. Thank you very much.
Why do we don't need steak knives, right?
No, you don't. You barely even need a fork. You could eat this with a spoon. Ugh. Falls apart.
This is transformational. This is unbelievably delicious. Oh.
It's so silky.
So it turns out that Swiss steaks are actually a fabulous recipe. And the secret was starting with a blade steak from the chuck. Now, a round steak has more fat and a lot more flavor. We cut it in half horizontally to get rid of that little piece of gristle. And then it was a basic braise, wasn't it? You sauteed it. We added some onions, some tomatoes, put it in the oven with some chicken stock for a couple hours, finished it off with a few brightening agents. There you have it, a great recipe for Cook's Country, something old made new again. Swiss steaks, better than porterhouse.
That's right.
It is. It is actually better than porterhouse. I stand on that.
I eat it.
This is it.
That's it, Chris. This is tomato paste, which is a hugely important ingredient in the test kitchen, and I'm going to explain why. But this is not straight from the can. We actually tasted tomato paste 3 ways. Straight from the can, the way you're doing it here, and the way the studio audience has done, where we cooked it down a bit. We got rid of some of the moisture. We browned the tomato paste a little bit to sort of develop its flavors, because that's how you use it. You don't really eat tomato paste straight from the can. We also did a test with marinara sauce. We thought this was the most informative, so I've given you the easiest of the 3 to do.
Oh, yeah, right.
The reason why we love tomato paste is because it's so rich in glutamates. Yes, the thing that's in MSG. And so it's a flavor enhancer. And we use tomato paste in beef stews, in chili recipes, in sauce recipes to sort of boost flavor. And you've got all of those meaty, rich, bright tomato notes that you're tasting.
Are you like a poet today?
There are others where it has sort of more deep notes that may have salt or spices.
So some of them are forward like you, and some of them are deep like me. Is that what you mean?
Oh, yes. That's it, Chris. Perfect summary.
Deep.
This is the one case, which doesn't happen very often, where the studio audience has chosen a different brand as their favorite than the test kitchen panel.
This was fairly lively, but it had that oregano thing going, and I would pick this one. It's not a huge difference here, but I would pick this one.
You chose the one sample that both the studio audience and the test kitchen panel hated. You know, there were
Like
kind
a
of
33% chance of winning. You know?
there were 2 right answers here, and you didn't get them. We thought it was a little bland.
This one had oregano. It was lively.
This is the Hunt's. This is the studio audience's favorite choice. It says spices on the label, which we interpret. We tasted oregano. And either you wanted that or you didn't want it. There wasn't really a right or wrong answer there, but there were people who didn't like that in their tomato paste and downgraded it.
And the winner was
The winner was Goya, which is just tomatoes. It doesn't have any spices in it. Doesn't have any salt in it. The Hunt's not a bad tomato paste, but with the oregano, some people didn't want the oregano in it and got some low votes because of that. Of course, you didn't choose either one of those.
So I crashed and burned, but all the people have a better palate than I do, like Goya tomato paste. Nice job. Back in the 1980s, I spent a lot of time in Sweden, especially Stockholm, and I found out a few interesting things about Sweden. First of all, there's 8 months of winter. There's about 4 hours of daylight in January. And in the old days, they didn't have a lot of fresh vegetables, of course, from probably November through March. So sometime at the end of winter, some poor guy was down in his root cellar looking at all those potatoes, drinking aquavit and going, hey, I can do something new. That's exactly what happened at the Hasselbacken Hotel in 1940. The chef decided to invent something new, which was the potato fan, the Hasselback potato, which is baked with a crispy, cheesy topping. So we're taking that notion all the way from Stockholm back to Cook's Country, and Julia will demonstrate how to make the Hasselback potato.
That's right.
Well, it's kind of like Sweden here. It's dark and cold. And
Yeah.
winter, so
And there's
why
lots
not?
of aquavit around.
There's a lot of aquavit around.
Yeah. Now, the crowning glory, as you said, on this potato fan is this cheesy breadcrumb topping. And although it would have been nice, to skip a step and use store-bought breadcrumbs, they really are pretty lousy, and they ruin the dish. You can see these are the store-bought crumbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they taste really stale. So it's really better to take a little extra time to make homemade breadcrumbs, which is really easy to do. This is one slice of white bread torn into biggish pieces. We're going to put it in the food processor and pulse them to coarse crumbs. Now, the thing about making fresh breadcrumbs, the crust actually adds a lot of volume. So if you're taking the crust off, you might have to use an extra slice of bread. And we're going to dry them in a 200-degree oven for about 20 minutes. So they're not going to get golden, they're just going to get dried. All right, so our breadcrumbs are out of the oven and they've cooled for a little bit. So you can see they're nice and coarse and they're not browned, but they're very dry.
Okay.
So to finish up the topping, we're going to add a little butter. This is 4 tablespoons of melted butter. And for the cheese, we found a lot of recipes that use cheddar, but we didn't find that to be so great. The cheddar was greasy and didn't melt very well. This is half a cup of shredded Monterey Jack. And for flavor, we're going to add a 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan. This is a teaspoon of paprika. This is half a teaspoon of garlic powder. Now, of course, we tried regular garlic, but it was too clumpy and it burned a little bit in the oven. The garlic powder was much more successful. This is 1/4 teaspoon salt and 1/4 teaspoon pepper. And that's it for the topping. We're just going to mix this together and then set it aside till we need it near the end. Now, on to the potatoes. Now, of course, when developing the recipe, we tried all the potatoes you can find in the supermarket, from red to white to Yukon Gold. But what we really liked was the russet, because when it bakes up, it has that fluffy interior texture. And also, its shape is more uniform, so it's easier to cut it into this unique potato fan shape. So, cutting a potato fan is surprisingly easy, but there are a few tricks. First, you want to look for the flattest side of the potato. We're going to make that the bottom. We're going to cut off just a thin sliver so that it lies flat on the cutting board. Now we're going to cut off a little bit on each end. Now, not only does this expose the potato flesh, but it also allows room for the fans to splay out while the potato bakes. And now the trickiest part, cutting those little fans. The trick we found is to use chopsticks. We're going to line the chopsticks on either side of the potato so that when we slice it through crosswise, it's like a knife guard. It doesn't let you cut all the way through. And there you go. That's how you do a potato fan.
So it's an accordion.
It is an
All right.
accordion, yeah. So the other trick we found when making these potato fans is that you really need to rinse away the excess starch that's on the surface of each fan, because if you don't, that starch turns to glue and it glues the potato back together as it bakes. All right, so these potatoes have been cut and rinsed and are ready to go. But the thing we found is that a lot of recipes just cook them through completely in the oven. But we didn't find that to be so successful because the hot air of the oven really dried out the fans and made them sort of desiccated and chip-like. What we found is that you would jumpstart the cooking of the potatoes in the microwave, get them softened, and then finish them in the oven to get the crisp edges. So to microwave them, we're going to turn them upside down and microwave them for anywhere to 6 to 12 minutes, depending on the strength of your microwave. You're looking for them to be pretty soft. And of course, we'll flip them over halfway through to make it even.
Okay. Every day when I walk into the kitchen, I have a question, and today's question here at Coast Country is, do I really need an immersion blender? And if so, which model? Adam is here to answer both of those questions. So do I need one?
Yes, you absolutely need one. They're especially good if you like to make soups in the winter, which I do. You just put the immersion blender right in the pot and let her rip. And it takes a little while, and you have to move it around, but you will end up with a very nice, smooth puree of broccoli soup without having to clean the blender jar, without having to wait and take extra time. So this is our lineup of 8 different immersion blenders. The price range was a low of $25 to a high of $100. We made mayonnaise out of eggs and oil. We made pesto out of fresh basil and pine nuts and Parmesan cheese. All of these were strong enough to get through our test. But the ones that blended more efficiently, the vents were cut above the level of the blade. There was also an issue with some of our testers and the comfort of some models. And I'm going to have you make a smoothie in the larger of those 2 jars.
This is really awkward. These
It is a little awkward. That one has 2 buttons. You have to press the power button first and then the on button. Now why don't you try that white number with the orange buttons on this other orange cup.
Easier to hold?
Much easier to hold.
Yeah,
Half
okay.
the weight. That's 1.5 pounds.
Ooh. I like this much better.
That one's much
Yeah.
better.
Ooh.
And in fact, this one is the winner, Chris. This is the Caloric Sunny Morning Stick Blender. Nice, cheerful name. It was $25, the least expensive one that we tested. It has the right relationship between these vents in the cage and the blade. The wand comes off, so you can just throw that in the dishwasher. Very easy to clean. It's a fabulous appliance to have.
So the Caloric at $25 is our winner of the stick blender. It has the worst name ever for any appliance.
Too cheerful for you, Chris?
But it was a winner, and also the wand comes out for cleaning, easy to use, and guess what? Christmas is coming. Put it on my list.
Now I know what to get you.
Oh, that's how sweet.
So these potatoes are just out of the microwave. And again, we microwaved them until they were just soft and they're nice and moist inside. So now we're going to put them on this foil-lined baking sheet. And we're going to brush them pretty thoroughly with olive oil. This is 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And you want to brush not only the skins, but you want to break open the little fans and try to get some oil down in there so that all the exposed sides get nice and crisp. You can see they're so soft that they really will start to splay apart as they bake, and that is the hallmark of a good potato fan. A little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper.
Explain to me what it is you want at the end. What
Right.
kind of texture do you want?
Well, it's kind of like a baked potato on the inside with that fluffy, russet texture that's really pretty creamy. But on the outside, you have much more surface area for those crisp, roasted edges. So it's like a balance between a roasted potato and a baked potato.
Okay.
They're delicious. So these need to be baked now in a hot oven. It's 450 degrees, about half an hour until you really start to see them brown.
Okay.
So those potato fans have been in the oven for about half an hour. Oh, don't they look cool?
They look like fans.
They do. And you can see they nicely splayed out, and that gives you those dual textures of the crisp edges and that nice fluffy interior.
And we should show you, though, because Julia had mentioned that you had to rinse them underwater, which I thought was incredibly stupid because it's just an extra step. But she was right once again. This is what happens to these potatoes if you don't rinse them and bake them. You can see these are all nicely splayed, and it's
stuck together.
Yeah, they really are stuck together. You can't. Yeah. So
That starch is like Elmer's.
she was right. There we are.
Now, before I put the topping on the potatoes, I'm going to put the broiler on and preheat it.
Okay.
And we're going to put this cheesy breadcrumb topping on top of the potatoes. And they're hot, so you want to be careful. You want to try to get some of that cheese down into the fans. And then we'll mound the rest right on top. And this is kind of a messy procedure, but you really want to try to get all the topping on top of the potatoes. So any that falls off, you can just scoop up and put right back on top of the potato.
No, even if you didn't like potatoes, this would be a great recipe because there's so much topping, right?
Exactly. All right. So I'm going to run these under the broiler for about 3 minutes or so. Let's get that cheese melted and that topping nice and browned. So those have been under the broiler for about 3 minutes.
Oof.
Oh, aren't they lookers?
Yeah, they are lookers.
Gorgeous. Let's dive into them here.
It's hot. Okay, it looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easy to eat too, because it's kind of half cut for you. You have the crisp edges and that tender interior and that topping.
It's delicious. So there you have it, Hasselback potatoes. The secret was to start with russets. We cut them into fans. We had to rinse them underwater so they wouldn't stick together. Into the microwave for about 9 or 10 minutes to pre-cook them, and then into the oven after a brush with olive oil, salt, and pepper. And finally, after baking for about half an hour, we put them back in under the broiler with a great cheesy breadcrumb toppings. There you have it, a great recipe from Cook's Country Hasselback potatoes. You can get this recipe, recipes from this season of the show with tastings and testings, and also watch selected episodes of this television show at our website at cookscountrytv.com. This is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I'm going right in the middle now.
All of today's recipes are just a click away. Visit our website anytime for free access to this season's recipes, taste tests, and equipment ratings, or to watch our current season episodes. Log on to cookscountrytv.com.
Best country recipes. Cooks Country TV's Home Recipe Companion includes every recipe, taste test, and equipment rating from this season's shows. With the Recipe Companion, you will also receive this 2-DVD set featuring all 13 episodes from this season. The cost for Best Country Recipes and the 2-DVD set is $19.95. To order, call 1-800-888-3384 or order online at cookscountrytv.com. Cooks Country from America's Test Kitchen is brought to you by DCS by Fisher & Paykel. America's cooks rely on innovation and culinary precision. DCS by Fisher & Paykel, offering premium indoor and outdoor kitchen appliances. Chef's Catalog, offering kitchen products for home chefs and cooking enthusiasts. Online at chefscatalog.com. And by Valley Fig Growers, offering a fruitful array of California figs.